It's the first time that you've spoken like this since you made the decision to resign. Why did you go?
I went, as I said at the time, out of a sense of both personal responsibility for shortcomings during my time and my own shortcomings, and out of a sense of institutional responsibility for the long-term revelations of cover-up and failure over a long period.
But when an official report said that you could and should have done more to take action against the abuser in the church, John Smyth, who abused more than 100 young people, at first you tried to stay on, and it was later that you resigned. So what changed your mind?
What changed my mind was having been caught by the report being leaked and not really thought it through enough, to be honest. Over that weekend, as I reread it, and as I reflected on the horrible suffering of the survivors, which had been, as many of them said, more than doubled by the institutional church's failure to respond adequately, it increasingly became clear to me that I needed to resign.
What exactly do you think you did wrong?
I think I was not sufficiently pushy in a way that I would have been a few years later. I have first heard about Smyth's offences in August of 2013. I'd been in post 11 weeks. And safeguarding had been the crisis I hadn't foreseen. I didn't realise how bad it was. And when I arrived and found that the total safeguarding staff at the centre was half of one person, and equivalent around the diocese. And then this report came from Ely Diocese of abuse of one person who'd reported it to their bishop. And we didn't see all the details till 2017. I should have pushed harder because I knew enough to know that people very rarely, almost never, abuse once. I should have said, are we absolutely sure there's no one else involved?
But why didn't you? I mean, this was 2013. The police had got involved. There'd previously been high-profile prosecutions even of clergy in the 2000s.
Absolutely.
We're not talking about the 1950s, the 1960s, the kind of era in this country when people just didn't talk about this kind of thing. Why didn't you care enough?
I cared. I wasn't curious enough.
Well, you said previously, I didn't care sufficiently. You didn't care sufficiently about young people being abused.
On that first report, that's a very fair comeback.
So
on that report,
why?
You're right. One thing was the rules of the time said that cases are investigated by the diocese where they're reported. The second thing was the police said, don't interfere. A few years later, I would have pushed harder. That's the technical reason. The other reason was, actually, you mentioned other criminal cases. Bishop Peter Ball, who was in the middle of his trial and being sent to prison. And I was very focused on that. I was also finding that every day more cases were coming across the desk that had been in the past, hadn't been dealt with adequately. And this was it was another case. And yes, I knew Smyth, but you can't, it was an absolutely overwhelming few weeks. Now, that's not an excuse. It's a reason, it's not an excuse.
But the police had been called
And
over
they
allegations of abuse being carried out by someone you knew.
Exactly.
You'd been warned years before in a different context that he wasn't a nice man.
It was overwhelming. One was trying to prioritise, and we knew with Peter Ball that there were numerous victims and survivors, one of the victims had committed suicide. That was so horrific, and it seemed so much bigger. But I think it's easy to sound defensive over this. The reality is I got it wrong. I did not do, as Archbishop, there are no excuses. Being overwhelmed is a reason, it isn't an excuse.
Some of the victims of John Smyth think that you were tone deaf. You took years to meet them. You didn't follow up that allegation, even though you knew the police were involved.
I certainly, since then, with the victims of Smyth that I'd met, and I'd met them before, back in 2020 or 2021 on an online thing, because it was COVID, I said sorry. And certainly, as I've met the ones who wanted to meet me, I have said sorry very much. And just for the avoidance of doubt, I am utterly sorry and feel a deep sense of personal failure, both for the victims of Smyth not being picked up sufficiently after 2017 when we knew the extent of it, and for my own personal failures.
The victims of Smyth, and indeed other abusers in the church, feel that the culture was significantly to blame for the fact that they weren't taken seriously. And the fact that when you made your speech in Parliament, you cracked some jokes, you talked about being technically in charge. When you were in charge, you talked about a head having to roll. That caused profound upset.
It did cause profound upset, and I am profoundly ashamed of that, and I apologised within 24 hours, and I remain deeply ashamed. It's one of those moments where, when I think of it, I just wince. It was entirely wrong and entirely inexcusable.
What were you thinking?
I wasn't in a good space at the time. I shouldn't have done a valedictory speech at all.
Because some victims believe actually the fact that for whatever reason you saw fit to joke about what had happened in public is revealing of the problem all along, is that senior people in the church for many years just haven't got it. And the church tactic is deny, delay, sometimes even denounce the victims.
I can absolutely understand why they should think that. It's not the case. A lot has changed. And if you look at our safeguarding now, for current cases, we have something close to 60 people in Church House in Westminster who work on training, on equipping, and on investigation. And the big thing, the front line, is every parish has a parish safeguarding officer.
And yet there's still no mandatory reporting in the church. There's still not a fully independent safeguarding system, which many people believe the only way to put this in order is to say the church can't handle this. You need to get an outside organisation.
And you would know from looking back over what I've said that I am entirely in favour of independent safeguarding.
And you were the boss for more than 10 years and it didn't happen.
It didn't happen because you have to get it through the General Synod.
So why don't they want it? Why they're resistant? And I think a lot of people watching this will be wondering not just about what happened in your time in church, but what is it more generally about religious organisations that find problems of abuse, when they emerge, so hard to deal with?
The Archbishop of Canterbury is not the chief executive of Church of England plc. You can't make things change by saying this will now happen. Otherwise, we'd have had independent safeguarding when I first raised it in 2016. Most vicars are doing a wonderful job, the overwhelming majority. The church has grown over the last few years. And it is very, very hard, and you'd know this from within organisations where you've worked, including your own, that you hear something, you think, that him? It's always a him, almost. That can't be true.
And is that what you thought when you heard about John Smyth?
Oh, absolutely not. No, I totally believed that this was, as is quite well known, I had a fairly difficult upbringing. I'm well experienced personally on the issues of abuse. And I always start that when someone declares abuse, divulges abuse, I start by taking it. My rule is you always take it seriously.
And yet you've just said you believed it.
Oh,
and you knew the police were involved, and then yet you still didn't follow it up. That's what makes this so extraordinary.
If you have a message from the police saying, under no circumstances are you to get involved because you will contaminate our inquiry.
But checking up on what happened next
and as I said, I should have done that. I should have pestered them, to be honest. And I see that now. I mean, you're quite right to raise the point.
I just want to be clear, to your knowledge, how many people are still on the church payroll or perhaps retired who knew about Smyth's abuse?
What I know is that the National Safeguarding Team, about 3 weeks ago, issued a statement, which you probably saw, which said that there were, it was roughly a dozen who were being taken to the disciplinary process. A lot have died, but there are a dozen who are going through a CDM, clergy discipline measure. And incidentally, at that time, they said they hadn't discovered anything that I'd done or not done, omitted to do, which would warrant CDM, which was an interesting point. I still feel responsible, but that's a different question.
Let's move on then, because you presided over the Church of England for more than 10 years, and there were huge changes during that time and a lot of turmoil in this country. And you presided over royal weddings, of course, her late Majesty's funeral, and of course, a coronation. I just wonder, what was your most meaningful moment?
I think the late Queen's funeral. The experience of that week. An extraordinary moment of being aware of the turn of history.
Let us commend to the mercy of God, our Maker and Redeemer, the soul of Elizabeth, our late Queen.
It was a beautiful sunny day. I was standing at the door of Westminster Hall, waiting for the coffin, and you heard from the distance the cheers, and then as it got closer, the sighs, the groans almost. Coronation, I mean, the greatest privilege one could ever ask for was to be involved in that.
God save the King!
God save the King! The most significant moment of that service for me was the anointing, which of course was behind the screen.
There has also, alongside lots and lots of turmoil in the UK in the last 10 years, been a lot of changes in our culture and also how we talk to each other. And
Indeed.
There's been a speeding up, if you like, of public conversation that's often more vitriolic.
Yes.
Is that something that you've observed? Is that something that you worry about?
Yes. I think the biggest challenge long term this country faces is social cohesion. Whether you are in favour or against or neutral, we are now certainly in the top 2 or 3, possibly the most diverse nation on earth. And that has happened in half a century. And the challenge of that is working out who we are. People want a cohesive society. They want a society where we know who we are and what we value and where we're going. And this is where the church plays its role.
You wrote, though, about social media last year that we can hate at a distance.
Yes.
And because of the intimacy or a tweet or a blog post, that hatred cuts into us. Do you think we rush to judge now?
I think we rush to judge. The first question one hears on most interviews, I heard one yesterday, is, are you going to resign? And having been the object of that question, it's a very difficult one to answer, because you think, am I letting people down? Is it the right thing to do? You know, it's a complicated question. I think there is a rush to judgment. There is this immense, and this goes back half a century, immense distrust of institutions. And there's a point where you need institutions to hold society together. And there's an absence, I'm not talking about safeguarding here, there is an absence of forgiveness. We don't treat our leaders as human. We expect them to be perfect. If you want perfect leaders, you won't have any leaders.
There was, of course, a huge frenzy around what happened to you. I mean, you had a farewell party at Lambeth Palace that was highly criticised. I think there was even a donation to a children's charity that was publicly refused.
That is correct, by the Children's Society, yeah.
I mean, do you feel that you were cancelled, if you like, in this modern frenzy?
We won't know that for 30 or 40 years, and I'll be dead by that time. I don't know. I can't answer that question. You'd have to ask others. I know that I let God down. I let people down.
So you were in charge of the church for more than 10 years. There were vigorous conversations during that time about same-sex relationships and about women. As we talk today, women can still be refused by some parishes, and gay people still can't have the same kind of celebration in a church as straight people. They can't have
Exactly.
a legal marriage in the Church of England. Are
Or
you
even a service of blessing in every church. Yeah.
In what way, then, can people look at that and think the church reflects the modern UK, where both women and gay people are treated as second-class citizens?
The Church of England is one part of 85 million people in 165 countries with over 2,000 cultures and languages. The average Anglican is a woman in her 30s in sub-Saharan Africa on less than $4 a day, a woman. The changes have been enormous. So coming back to the UK, I'm not trying to avoid your question, I'm trying to put it in context. Coming back to the UK, if I were to say to you, do you agree on everything with all of your extended family? I suspect you'd say no, because I don't know anyone who'd say yes, and be honest. The church is not a self-selecting club. It is the family of Christ. It is God's family. And we disagree amongst each other, but that doesn't stop us being family. And the role of the Archbishop and of the bishops is to allow people to remain in the family without totally dismissing standards that are essential.
But in that family, as it stands, gay people and women might be entitled to think they're not as welcome. They're not equal members of the family. And some people also in the church might feel that it was more the Archbishop of Canterbury's role to lead this rather than to fudge it in order to try to keep that family together. What do you say to that?
I would say there's a practical political reason. You have to get it through the General Synod of the Church of England.
So are they out of date?
I'm not saying that. I'm saying they have very different views. And there isn't a big enough majority to get it through. You need a 2/3 majority under the rules Parliament set. And we wouldn't have got women bishops through if we hadn't made provision for those who on theological grounds have a different view.
Is it disappointing to you, though, as somebody who
Yes.
wanted that to happen? So
Yes.
you left the job disappointed at the...
Yes. Yes.
And let's just end then where we began. Your career as Archbishop of Canterbury, the most senior job anybody in your position could have dreamt of, ended in a very public and a very painful way. But you've mentioned today, and you've written and talked before a lot about forgiveness. Would you like the victims of John Smyth to forgive you?
Obviously, but it's not about me. When we talk about safeguarding, the centre of it are the victims and survivors. I have never, ever said to a survivor, you must forgive, because that is their sovereign, absolute, individual choice. Everyone wants to be forgiven, but to demand forgiveness is to abuse again.
The Macon report, though, the official report into this, does suggest, it says it's really unlikely that you didn't know anything before 2013.
You can believe it or not, I did not have a clue.
You wrote, to forgive is not to pretend that nothing's happened. It's the opposite. It accepts the full weight of the wrong. Do you forgive John Smyth?
Yes. I think if he was alive and I saw him, but it's not me he's abused. He's abused the victims and survivors. So whether I forgive or not is, to a large extent, irrelevant. What matters is, are the survivors and everyone responds differently to abuse, but are the survivors sufficiently loved by the church and cared for, and are enabled, liberated to rebuild their lives? After that, you can start talking about forgiveness.
And we know many of his victims don't feel that the church has shown them love.
Exactly.
And they don't feel that you showed them moral leadership.
Yes.
How do you think a victim of John Smyth might react to you saying that you could forgive him? Because he didn't abuse you.
I would say exactly what I just said. It's not about whether I do. Yes, you asked me a question, I gave an honest answer. But I also said that that's irrelevant. The point is the church, nobody's going to say to them, you must forgive. I've never said it to a survivor, I never would. But is the church behaving in a way and loving in a way, and it hasn't, in a way that enables people to have that choice freely for themselves, and not because some archbishop has said it's a good thing. That's what matters.
Justin Welby, thank you so much for speaking to us
Thank you
today.
very much.